Disclaimer: this video is a casual review meant to only share my own opinions and point of view. And since I haven't played this game since 2.3 came out, I might have forgotten quite a lot of things. But I did play through the last act of 2.3, hence why you would see that this review will start with that section first. And obviously, since it's my own opinion and very biased opinion, you don't have to necessarily agree with what I'm saying. It's just that I wish to share my own opinions and thoughts with everyone else. And another few more things, please don't mind how loud I'm reading while recording this audio. There's nothing, unfortunately, I could do about that. Eh, eh, I mean, I'll try my best, but please don't mind the reading too much. When Penacony first came out, everyone was definitely excited to see where the story was going, especially since there is such a deep intrigue and mysteries surrounding the story when it first came out. However, now that the story has long ended, we see quite a lot of sentiments on Reddit about how the story was actually not as good as everyone was hoping to be, and due to just that sheer amount of curiosity, I decided that I wanted to revisit the whole story and see actually how good it is now that the main storyline has ended a long time ago and a new update is about to come. And to see if once the new update comes out, whether or not the same situation will happen again. My name is Amelia. This is a casual sport channel where I, a hobbyist writer, would like to share and review stories in a casual way with all of my audience, whether that would be stories from video games, webtoons, mangas, and web novels, or even novels themselves. Today's casual review will answer the question that I believe that some already are curious about and some already have their own opinions on, which is how good is Penacony's story actually? And then an extra disclaimer for the video, this is a a mildly scripted review, so my opinions and thoughts might be all over the place while I'm talking to the mic, so I hope you don't mind that you might be taken in for a very strange ride throughout the video. Now, generally, what I think of the third act of the story is that it does a good enough job where it gave everyone a ending, or well, at least we see everyone once again to make sure that, they're all alive. Even though I believe that MiHoYo didn't have the guts to kill off one of their characters like they did back in Honkai Impact 3rd. But it's always nice to know that, some of your favorite characters are still alive, like eventually. Well, technically none of them really died either, so I guess it really wasn't like a surprise. You at least get to see everyone again before the Charmony festival starts. The biggest problem I have with the third act of the story, it's supposed to be a closing, is that how they dealt with the Firefly and the third death section. So, it's established before, Ilio's script mentioned that Firefly will die 3 times. The first time was being stabbed, second time was also, no, actually it was not being stabbed, I think she just disappeared somewhere. And the third time, which is this one, is taking a bomb and detonate it into the air. Now, if you compare this death to the other two, it's really comical in like a weird way because this third death feels so insignificant compared to the previous two, where it doesn't have to be Firefly that's the one that took off the bomb and took it off into the air. It literally could be anyone else, which I think is a core problem with the story, which I will talk more about later, but we'll put that aside for now. So, well, besides that, the third death thing, I think it's really, really bad. Also the fact that, was spinning in the air, I don't really know what to say to that because it just seems kind of funny. I understand what they were going for when they made the CG. It was because of the vibes that Firefly, this character was written for the start. I think most people have at least realized at this point that what Firefly was written for is basically like the Trailblazers' love interest. Like, doesn't matter whether you chose the female one or the male one, it's just their love interest. It's what that feels like. And that, however, could be a problem, which we'll also mention later, not right now. But Besides that, the third act does enough of a job where it says goodbye to everyone. We say goodbye to the world, to the adventure, and that scene where Black Swan comes out and suggests us to travel to a place that Aki really has not even traveled to. So besides all those parts, you can say that if you look at this act alone, it's okay. Really, the ending of a story, it feels okay. You're close off everything you should, but you left a bit too much, which is the problem, I feel like. The problem is the story in general, even though they closed off, by closed off, I just mean they say goodbye, right? They don't really close off every mystery either. We would also talk more about that in another section, which is not this one. But generally, like I said, I think the third act does a good enough job as a closing act. But that's all it is. It's just a closing act. A good closing act. Which means that it doesn't really get a passing grade here. You will know why after you see the rest of this video. Now, what I feel about the characterization of most of the characters that we have met in Penacony, whether that would be new characters or old characters, I feel like they don't really do enough of a job where, well, their existence is vital. Like, their importance to the story is vital. But there's also quite a lot that it's never really explained what's happened, or it's never really explained, like, okay, why he chose that method, or like what he's seen. For example, Adventure. So now that I think about it, what did Adventure see and where exactly did he go? Like, okay, so he was cut by Archeron, and there's a whole basically gap in Penacony. But seriously, where did he go? What happened to him? He's not dead, obviously. You see him in the third act, so he's obviously not dead. Like I mentioned before, I don't think Mihoyo has the guts to kill off the character. But what did he see? Like, what did he do while he was there? Oh, did he just did nothing? Did he just go on the stroll and just came back? Like, how did he come back? That is not explained. That is just like there for some reason, because the third act starts with Jade and Topaz. We know what their reasoning here is for, but it starts with Jade and Topaz. It doesn't really explain where Adventuring has gone either. So it's just like, huh. And that's the thing, really. There's a lot of characters that it's not utilized fully, or they feel so useless in certain parts where it's just like, okay, it could be you, but it could be an NPC, but it also could be another character. It doesn't have to be you. The prime example of this would be Argentine, right? He appears in as one of the final challenges for that specific section, but to be honest, it doesn't have to be him. If you really think about it, his existence in that specific form doesn't really add much to himself or the story. He just exists. The boss doesn't have to be him. The boss could be anyone else. Which is my point. They don't really utilize the characters fully enough where it feels like their characterization is good. That's also another problem with a lot of characters in Penacony as well, is that they feel like very flat characters, right? Besides Aventurine, Archeron, and Firefly to a certain extent, I feel like a lot of other characters are either not fully explored, or they are explored but outside of the story that we are playing through. There's a lot to them. You can tell there's a lot to them. But you also don't really know what the a lot is. The a lot is a very vague term, because you could possibly describe Venturing as, he's a gambler. He's a gambler his whole life because of how he came this way, because of the terrible environment he was in. He was very willing to gamble everything he has just to get a chance to stand on top, just to get a chance to fulfill that wish. But that, by essence, is his whole character. I'm sure it's very critical to say that, because I'm sure there's a lot of Adventuring fans out there. There's also a lot of Archeron fans out there. But seriously, they don't have much to them. They have a bit of depth, but that depth is not deep enough where it holds them up as people. What it does the most is it holds them up as characters, and that's it. There's a difference in my eyes to what I describe as character and what I describe as people. Because people are very strange. In a way, a lot of contradictions exist with each other. In a way that a lot of things that don't seem to make sense with one another seems to exist in the same context. In a way, they always have a different morality depending on who's asking, what's the situation, and whatnot. But characters, they are flat. Right. They only serve the purpose they were written for, and that's it. But they are better than plot device because at the very least you could at least say that, oh, these character traits mean more to them. Plot device characters can be really, really charming. However, by the end of the day, they are plot device, so there isn't really much depth to them in the first place. But there's also quite a few plot device characters, or just that, they do nothing really. Like I said before, the problem is that a lot of characters in the story is either replaceable, or if they're not replaceable, is that there's not much depth to them. And also, you never really get to understand. Okay, at least you get to understand their motivation, their drive, like what made them do this, what made them decide to choose this route. This is very clear with Adventury, with Archeron, with Firefly, with Sunday. But the problem is you don't really get to see what they are doing to get to that point. Like, they just like to tell you, okay, I'm here because of this. I'm here because of this. I'm doing this because of this. But then how did they get to that point? Sunday is an exception to this because you quite literally get to see a lot of how his desire, how the way he views harmony changes as he sits in the booth and he listens to more people confessing for their sins. But quite a lot of other characters where it's just like, okay, they're getting from point A to point B because because they needed to get from point A to point B, but you don't really see the process either. And that's really the problem with the plot. And that will also be mentioned later. We're not talking about plot right now, we're talking about characters. But otherwise, I feel like they do a good enough job where most characters are charming. Even Foothill, for example, I feel like he's very replaceable as a Galaxy Ranger. He could have been literally any other character, right? I feel like they had to shoehorn him in the story because they already have plans to release a Galaxy Ranger character. But it doesn't necessarily have to be him. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be him. It could be anyone else. Because his ties to the story isn't as strong as everyone else's. Or at least I don't really remember it much because, the only thing I remember about him is that he talks funny and he's a cowboy. Which two character traits alone makes it charming. And sometimes the VAs really do a great job at elevating those characters to the point where they reach a height they shouldn't be reaching. Because honestly, if you think about it, they are better than plot devices, but they are still very flat characters. Now you may be wondering why there is a Firefly section. Well, I will answer that question right now. It's because of the amount of controversies the character has given to the whole story and the game in general. So I'm sure most of us are aware that now the meta is Super Break. And who started Super Break? Firefly! Yay! So that's one thing, right? That's one thing why some people might not like her is because she basically just rooted like the whole game into Super Break meta. Because even now, when you see the support characters released, they are also relating to Super Break. So if you don't have Firefly, your game experience might be a bit worse than other people. It's not that the game is unplayable, it's just that because the whole game caters around Super Break now, it's just that it makes your life a bit more suffering than it used to be. Now, Firefly herself, I don't really feel much things towards, even though, like I mentioned earlier, that she's written to be the Trailblazer's love interest. You can tell from the way that she interacted with us, the way that we have to interact with her with the options that we are given. Even though when you really think about it, the first time you met her, before you took the photo, you probably have only met her for like an hour or two at most. And it's really strange that you would be so kind, so soft to a stranger. I mean, some people would, different people, different way of acting. There's nothing wrong with that. But by context of Trailblazer, I don't feel like they'll be so nice to a stranger, especially to a stranger where it's more like borderline. So nice to a stranger where it feels like they are borderline flirting with them. So that's one of the problems that I see a lot in the Chinese community, the China side of Honkai Star Rail's community. Some of them complain that they don't really like the way that MiHoYo is basically forcing us to play nice with Firefly, forcing us to have to accept Firefly's feelings, because if we don't, she will be sad. And we mostly are nice people and we don't want people to be feeling sad because of our actions. And that's another thing about the character is that she's very much written to be sort of like that kind of Gal game archetype where the character, one of the female characters, is your childhood friend that you have known for a very long time and has had feelings for you. The problem is, we as Trailblazers don't really remember who Firefly is, even though Firefly remembers us. So it doesn't make sense character-wise for the Trailblazers to act so kindly towards Firefly. Because honestly, like I mentioned, they are a stranger. At that moment, they are just a stranger. You don't know who they are, you only know that they are a wanted criminal, and that's it. So it's really strange. I mean, I understand why he would seem angry when Firefly first died, because obviously no one likes to see one of their new friends getting stabbed, right? But it's really strange still. Like the amount of expressions, the amount of feelings that Trailblazer seems to be giving Firefly, it's feeling very strange if you really look at it, if you're not buying into the fan service that the character is written for. To some people, that would turn them off from Firefly, which I think is a slight missed opportunity because I feel like the character is actually quite interesting. But I know that she's about to die only because of the story. I didn't watch the PV either, so I can't say that I know very much about the character outside of the story. But even in the story, she didn't really give me much of a feeling. I feel very neutral towards her. My option towards her are always the more kind type because I just feel like, oh, it's the right choice to make. It's not really a choice that I make on my own. It just feels like it's right at that moment. There's actually quite a few problems with the plot itself as well. So, initially, when we first entered Penacony, we were looking for the Watchmaker's Legacy because apparently it could grant wishes or something. I don't quite remember what we were looking for. I don't quite remember why we were looking for it, but yeah, it's just a thing. But the problem is, I don't actually remember whether or not it's told what the legacy is. Is the legacy the hat? Or is the legacy supposed to be something else? That's one of the things that the story doesn't really fully explain either. Like I mentioned in the characterization side as well, is that a lot of things happen from point A to point B, but you don't really know what happened in between. Like, it's fine, every story will go from point A to point B, but you at least get to involve in the process. But Penacony, there's a lot of things that just go from point A to point B without any explanation in between, or that we switch from other people's point point of view. However, their point of view don't really add too much to the story either. It's just that they themselves know what's happening. And that's a problem, actually. Especially everything relating to Sparkle. Sparkle's words are always very ominous. Like she's trying to imply something. But you also don't know what she's trying to imply. Like, okay, alright, whatever you say, girl, whatever. That's also another thing is that for some reason they like to write people speaking in literal riddles. Well, not literally, figuratively. That is a very big problem, however. The thing about them speaking in riddles, the reason why I would describe it as riddles, is because this is a use of lack of information between us and the characters. Like the characters, they at least knew what they were going to do, what was happening, but to us players, we don't really know what's happening either. We just know that he said, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. Oh, okay, I did this. But he don't really explain why he did this, or or how he did this before, or or why this happened. It just happens, and then you're just left with the confusion of, so how do we get here? This problem is more prominent in Xianzhou Luofu because in Xianzhou Luofu, they explained nothing, which is worse because they explained absolutely nothing. However, one thing that Penacony does worse is that because they have a lot more characters to juggle around with, like I mentioned in the characterization section, is that quite a lot of characters either feel replaceable or they just there, like they just exist. Like, okay, sure. That's another thing about the plot, right? Is that much like Senzo Lawful, what it's shown, it's always those like big, epic, exciting moments. But what happens in between those moments is very rarely seen, even though Cody does a bit better. But there's quite a lot of things where it's like it's spoken in literal riddles, and then your brain just goes, okay, how do we get to this point? Is it implied? Is it right? What? Sorry, what? One thing I realized I didn't mention while earlier in the direct section was that it's actually the implication that Elio has decided to ask Sparkle for help to let Firefly go through her third death that way. And that plotline is just really strange if you put that implication in. Because, okay, they've written themselves into a wall, right? They say 3 deaths, so they have to do 3 deaths. But I feel like the third death will be better if they imply that it was happening in Jade's pawn shop instead of what happened. I feel like that would be a lot better because you can put death as psychological. You don't have to always write everything literally. And that's also a good problem. So, one of the other problems I have with the plot is the question that the letter asks us. Like, why do we sleep? Well, technically, it's why do people choose to suffer? The Trailblazer's answer is because in the end we'll wake up from our dreams. But from the way that the story is written, from the way that we have gone through this journey, have we really gone through that conclusion on our own? I would say absolutely not. I feel like it's more of a logical answer to the question rather than something that we have come to a conclusion to. So this answer really doesn't work in the context of the story either. Actually, the question feels like it's abandoned well after it's asked, because I understand why they will ask a question like that, right? It's like the Honkai Impact third question, which is why do birds fly? But that part is done a lot better because I feel like the journey does at least get us to that conclusion, right? Maybe not the same answer, but at least it's an answer that we could approve of. However, this answer, I would say I do not approve. I absolutely do not approve. I don't have a better answer simply because I feel like what we have done, what we have gone through, what has happened, doesn't really allow us to answer this question properly. There's no proper answer to this question because we haven't really gone through the journey properly either. And that's another point. Why would they ask the question? Because when you ask a question like this, looking at it as a writer, you are asking the viewer, the player, or the reader to think about it. You think about this question while this journey is happening. However, this question feels like it's abandoned to the side once we start the middle, the 2.2 update, 2.1 update. That question, what should feels like the core theme of the story is just thrown aside, right? Like none of the characters really embody the question or the answer as well. So I feel like it's just a question that exists, and that is a showing of Hinokuni's story as a whole. There's a lot of things that's exciting, that's engaging. You can tell it's good by concept, but by execution, it's so bad that it doesn't really matter if the answer is somewhere else because the execution is bad normally, then why would we look somewhere else for the actual answer? Like, this is another thing with the plot, is that there's a lot of things that happened outside of what we know, which is a big problem because this is a video game, right? This is a video game, and you don't really have written the story concrete enough where everything feels like it makes sense. So then why don't you write it in the story? Why did you have to write it elsewhere? It's not really supplementary material either. Because supplementary material to me means that you're adding on to the lore, you're adding on to the big story. However, in this case, much like Xianzhou Luofu, what is happening is that the supplementary material is required to know what's happening in the story. It doesn't matter whether or not it's translated poorly, because obviously the draft is written in Chinese and will be translated into English. It's not that the translation is the problem. The translation could bring a bit of problems because there are some words that are impossible to translate, right? Especially when it comes to 新中国 where they have written the story in like this traditional Chinese poem style, 文言文. But really, it feels very strange either as a Chinese person looking at the text because it's like I half understand what's happening, but the half of the time it's just like, okay, what the hell is happening? Does someone want to explain to me? It's the same thing with Penacony, but like I said, it's a bit less worse, but worse in the aspect of how they handle the characters. So that's the thing. You shouldn't put important stuff in supplementary material. The things that you know most players will see, except for those who are very, very invested in the lore. It's like remember people saying that Shinzo was supposed to be a good story. The problem is they don't say shit, right? They don't say shit. If they don't say shit, it's not a good story. It's just a plot draft, which is what Shinzo feels like. Cody still has that feeling. It's just not as strong as it was before. However, it still feels like a very rough plot draft where the process is there, but it's also not there. It exists. Like quite a lot of things. It just exists for the sake of making things make sense. However, it doesn't really make sense either. So, it's a bad cycle. We're all going nowhere. The story doesn't even do a good enough job to intrigue the player to look deeper for themselves. Because if you look deeper, the only feeling you would get is frustration and anger at why haven't they just written this in? Like, don't keep it secret. Especially when it comes to Shinzo Lofu, like, don't keep no secret. It's integral to the plot. It's integral to know what's happened. So you can tell why the story has happened to this point or why everything has come to this point. But they say nothing. It's the same in Penacony, but like I said, it's a bit less worse than 现奏罗浮 because at least they do explain things, but they don't explain everything either. At the very least, I'm very grateful the way they handled the nameless section. I feel like the nameless section is the best written plotline in the whole story. Then again, they didn't have much to work with, right? It's like a very low bar. It's a very low bar. If they even messed that up, like how they messed up Shinzo Lofu, then whoever is writing the story should be fired. I'm being serious. As you can tell from my review, I think that Penacony has the potential to be an amazing story. But they fumbled so bad at the execution side that what's supposed to be exciting plot drafts just becomes boring and bad plot drafts because they never really go anywhere or they never really explain what's happening. Which is a problem. Some people say that this is Chinese writing, but as a Chinese person, you can tell from earlier, as a Chinese person who has read novels, like many, many Chinese novels, I can tell you this is not how Chinese writing is supposed to work. One thing about Chinese characters is that they are informational dense, right? Their density of information it far surpasses any languages in the world. They can convey quite a lot of things with very short sentences. And those sentences, when translated into other languages, basically fail because there's quite a lot of information that can't be carried over. However, this is not really a language problem. It's more of a writing problem. Because what I'm saying is the basics of story writing. It's the bare minimum. It's a low bar. It's a standard. If you couldn't even reach that standard, it means that your writing really, really has a big problem and you really need to go back and improve immediately. But that's the thing, right? Penacony has such an amazing start. The start, incredible. The start, if I rate up the start alone, I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Really. Because it's such dramatic in a good way, where it makes you feel that you're stuck in this place where you can't trust anybody, where everything around you is unknown and you can't really predict what's going to happen. Right? That kind of intrigue, that kind of fear, and that kind of mystery is a very good start. However, they only have a good start. They don't have a good conclusion. They don't have a good conclusion to the mysteries they have given. Instead, it just feels like they fumbled like right after the start. Like they just started drawing random shit all around and then they just went with it, which is the problem, really. So, all in all, I think I would rate Penacony like a 5 or maybe being generous, a 6 at most, and that's it. They pass a very low bar compared to 新周罗浮, but like I said, it's a low bar. right? Most of us can get through it very, very easily. And yet, it took them 3 updates to get through the low bar. Actually, I feel like Battleground's story is a lot better than these two because it's very short and it's very cohesive. But to be honest, maybe they should just stick back to writing short stories. But I don't think 3.0 would be a short story either. I'm not sure how 3.0's story will be. I did notice that there's quite a lot of familiar faces to some people, especially those of us who have looked at Honkai Impact Third. And I hope that they don't fumble it like how they started with Penacony, right? I hope they don't repeat this again, but honestly, I don't think after these two, I don't have much faith in the writer. Maybe they could do a good job, maybe they don't. Who knows, really? I only hope the best for the rest of you because I probably won't touch this game ever again. Unfortunately, I have burnt out for this game, and I just decided that this game was just really, really not for me. Thank you for watching this video. I feel like it's a pain to hear me ramble for I don't know how long because I have quite a lot of times where I say the wrong words. So I have to re-edit this audio, but I feel like it'll be like 20-ish minutes maybe. Might be underestimating it, might be overestimating it. I can't be very sure, but yeah, I'm still working on my pronunciation and stuff. You know, I hope I did a good job at conveying my thoughts and opinions to all of you. And the next video will probably come out next week or maybe during Chinese New Year. Uh, I can't be very sure because my own work ethic is shitty. So originally what the next video was supposed to be is Endless Zone Zero. However, I only am at chapter 2. We haven't a past interlude. So I don't think they will come out next week. Maybe we will do maybe we will do Jujutsu Kaisen first. Because that was the on my planning that was supposed to be the third video. However, I feel like maybe I will bring that up because, like I said, I haven't finished DT yet. So maybe next week you will see me again, but I'm not sure. Please don't expect very consistent updates because I have commitments and obviously, like I said mentioned earlier, I have a terrible work ethic. Okay, I'm very lazy. Anyways, like I said again, thank you for watching the video. I hope you have fun at least, you know. Subscribe if you are entertained and see you next time.